At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, soundbath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Hey, Lonzo Ball, it's your agent.
What's up?
I've got a commercial opportunity for you from Buzz Ball's Ready-to-Go Cocktails.
Nice. My last name is Ball. The product is a cocktail in a ball. I get it.
That's what I thought, too, but no. They want you for your hands. They think your big hands will show off the size of their new Blue Biggies ball.
Big blue balls? Really?
Get blue balls this season with Buzz Balls.
Please drink responsibly. Buzz Balls available in spirit, wine, and malt. 15% alcohol by volume. Buzz Balls, LLC, Carrollton, Texas.
Hello and welcome to the 1865 match report. Well, where do we start with that one? It finished Forest 2, Leicester 2, as the relegated Foxes put a massive dent in Forest's Champions League hopes. We had it in our hands. Forest were 2-1 up with 10 minutes remaining, but a late equaliser from Facundo Buonanotte after another defensive mix-up by Forest meant that the points were shared. The game finished 2-2, and it just set the seal on a disappointing day and a bit of a strange one, I think, when all things are considered. We'll get into that over the course of this match report. I'm Stephen Topless, and I'm joined by George Edwards. Hard to know what to say after that, George. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's hard to know how to feel, Stephen. I think it's okay to feel two things, and there's two rife emotions going around Forest fans at the minute, because the win obviously sees us secure Europe, and that fills you with so much pride, so much joy, and so much, gratitude that Forest have risen from being one of the favourites to relegation, playing some entertaining football that is absolutely breathtaking, blowing some brilliant teams off the park and creating memories that, all of us will cherish. And to achieve European football this season with the sort of bare bones squad that we have is something quite spectacular. And to have done so in the backdrop of everybody continuing to write us off is phenomenal. But at the same time, the manner of it and the manner of the result today, the fact we've only picked up 1 point from 3 favourable home games, mean that everybody's filled with a bit of disappointment and regret and anger really at how the season seemingly has petered out, because it's been in Forest's hands for so long. They've been in such a dominant position. They've been overlooking everybody and they've been doing their job for so long. And then something seemed to change. Maybe some injuries didn't help. And I think you could see today the momentum and the belief has really gone, I think, in terms of Forest being 2-2 with 20 minutes to play. Earlier on in the season, that would have only spurred them on. They might have gone over the line playing that same momentous football, but the spark just wasn't there today. I think Murillo was a big miss, because his ever-positive mindset really spurs everybody on. But overall, the spark just wasn't there. It really petered out, as the season, unfortunately, is doing. And I think Forest, I really hope they can, leave a lasting impact on this season, beating West Ham and beating Chelsea. But the Leicester result is a real disappointment, apart from the silver lining that at least we'll be in Europe in some stage next season.
Yeah, it's just which European competition that is going to be. So Champions League football, that's no longer in Forest's hands. We've got to rely on other teams to drop points, and also Forest winning their final 2 against West Ham and then Chelsea. But yes, for the first time in 30 years, Forest will be playing European football, and that's brilliant. But you wouldn't have known that at the final whistle today. The City ground was a strange atmosphere, actually. It really was. It was almost like a team that had been relegated, because Forest fans were booing at the final whistle. And we'll get on to Evangelos Marinakis and Nuno in a bit. But yeah, it's just a very strange atmosphere where your team is qualifying for Europe, but your fans are booing you off the pitch. And it's a number of factors that I think the fact it was Leicester today, such a poor team that were there for the taking and we didn't get the job done. But also the fact that Forest have qualified for Europe, and that's brilliant, but they've qualified quite poorly when the results and performances of the last few weeks are taken into account.
Yeah, qualifying for Europe shouldn't feel this way, should it? It should be a momentous occasion. It should be something that everything, it's like an end goal, if you like. And obviously we'll get onto it with the Marinakis statement, crediting the fact that Forest have achieved Europe. But, at full time, you wouldn't have known it. Chris Wood scored his 20th goal of the season, but nobody really knew about that because there was such negativity about where Forest, the direction that they've ended steering themselves in. And yeah, it's been phenomenal this season, but it's like in football, if you're 2-0 down and you end up being 2-2. If you're the team that was 2-0 up, it feels like a loss. If you're the team that was 2-0 down, it feels like a win. Forest have been in that position of control, have almost thought they were there, and something that we thought was a dream, maybe in beating Liverpool, we thought, is this going to be the peak of this season? Then we maintained and got into the top four. Then we went up that run of 6 games undefeated or winning and getting to second place halfway through the season. Then it started to sink in as a reality. And then going into, February, March, it became almost an expectation that it seemed to be where Forest were destined to be. And, all the Forest bottling things and never having enough to get over the line, never doing things the easy way. It seemed like that had left them and they were this new revolutioned mentality monsters. And unfortunately, that's not been the case. And injuries, suspensions, and a real sort of tiredness, I think, because mentally and physically has encapsulated the squad. And in the end, it doesn't look like enough to get what we all thought was going to be the destined and final goal.
Let's have a look then at the game itself, and we'll start with the team news. A couple of changes for Forest, some enforced. So the big news was that Murillo wasn't in the squad. He hobbled off in the game against Crystal Palace late on. He was replaced in the back four by Morato. So Forest lined up in a 4-2-3-1 with Matt Sells in goal, a back four of Ola Aina, Nikola Milenkovic, Morato and Nico Williams. Midfield 2 of Ibrahim Sangare and Elliot Anderson. In front of them are 3 of Nicholas Dominguez, Morgan Gibbs-White and Anthony Elanga, with Chris Wood, the lone striker. And yeah, I think given the situation with Murillo, we weren't sure if he was going to be back in time for this game or whether Forest would actually take a risk with him, given that it's Leicester. And that wasn't the case. Murillo was out and Morato started. And I think overall, George, the team looked solid enough. It looked good enough to get the job done, didn't it?
Yeah, obviously there's a huge sense of inconfidence when Forest have to change, particularly in that rigid back five. We think of when Aina was out for a month or when Nico was suspended, that solid base that's been such a reliable sort of unit this season. You don't like to disrupt it if possible, but I think Murillo is, he's heavy on his feet and that's always likely to happen. Morato hasn't overly impressed me recently. I think his performances off the bench have been quite lethargic, and where earlier in the season he'd signify strength, I think he's also signified a bit of weakness and negativity when he's came on. So I was maybe expecting Willy Boly to get a start, although maybe that was more what I hoped would happen rather than what I expected to happen. But, given that team news, given it was only one change, and given we've got players like Sangare, who we'll come on to, who's in really good form, I think you had to be confident Forest to get the job done, because Leicester had nothing to play for. Forest had everything to play for. Forest are clearly a much better side in terms of quality, in terms of mental strength, and in terms of tactics. And regardless of whether Callum Hudson-Odoi wasn't fit, Murillo wasn't fit, Yates, he wasn't in the starting lineup, Forest ultimately should have had enough to win. And I think it comes down to mental factors and fatigue that they didn't really in the end, because that squad should have enough to beat Leicester, undoubtedly.
When I saw the team news, the only doubt I had was playing Dominguez as that sort of right winger. And I know it's a position he's played this season and he's played it effectively. And in this game, actually, he played quite well. But I would have thought against Leicester, we could have played one of Jota Silva or Ramon Sosa. I know they're not at the standard of Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, but they're still good enough against Leicester. And I think that would have allowed us to play in more of our preferred style with 2 wingers and pace on the wings, which for all the hard work and graft of Nicholas Dominguez out there, he doesn't have that natural pace that a winger naturally does.
No, I completely agree, Stephen. I think Dominguez actually was one of the best performers on the pitch. I think he never stops running. He's so good positionally, defensively, and he's always an option. But he's just not a threat as an out-and-out winger. He's not got the pace. He's not got the skill. He's not really got the end product, and he's not got the vision ambition to be someone like Elanga who might try a sprint down the line, might try a ball over the top. He likes to play it safe, and that's why he's a midfield player, and that's why he performs at it so well. And there was a time last season he did a job. I think Manchester United, he was superb out there, and when it's necessary, and Man City played out there, played brilliantly next to Ireland on the right wing. But in a game like this, as you say, when we've got a lot of freedom, I thought first 10 minutes Forest were absolutely superb, and I thought they were going to blow Leicester off the park really, with the amount of space that we had in midfield and out wide. Seemed like the perfect opportunity for Sousa and Jota to start. So that's why I'm baffled, that Nuno and Marinakis didn't strengthen in January. Obviously, we don't know the PSR regulations, but clearly he doesn't have faith in either of them to start a game. And I can see it with Jota. I think if he starts a game, it's awful because he offers no defensive help to Nico or to Wine or whoever's playing fullback. And he's probably got himself sent off. I think somebody said in the group chat in the first half. But I think Ramon Sousa, started against Everton, did reasonably well. He's never really had that much of an impact in a game. But I think, Forest could have maybe afforded to have a passenger at the risk of Sousa coming off and doing well and being a threat, because they just didn't have that with Dominguez. And that, like Crystal Palace did, they made sure they doubled up on Elanga, and on the other side, nothing came. So it was a disappointment. And I think going forward, Forest have to certainly either have more confidence in Jota or Sousa, or sign two players to replace them, because we can't go on just having faith in Anthony Elanga and hoping one of them will come off the bench for 20 minutes and do something.
And we do miss Callum Hudson-Odoi as well, don't we? I think in this game today, he would have been a real threat, and he would have, I think he would have given us that kind of shape that's worked so well, because we've fallen into this trap, particularly down the left-hand side, of playing a bit of passenger football. The ball gets knocked around a lot. There's no real pace to it. Players are trotting around. There's maybe an overlap, but then it normally breaks down. Whereas Hudson-Odoi out there just seems to make things happen. Even if he's just got the ball, he seems to draw three opposition defenders towards him and force the opposition out of shape. Whereas I think without him, we do lose a lot from that left-hand side.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think sometimes he does lack the end product and the consistency in front of goal. But he's always an option. He's always an outlet. And him and Elanga together, with Morgan in the middle and Wood up front, has been where we play that absolute best football. It's the front four that maybe is one of the best in the league in terms of how well they connect. You think back to the Ipswich game, which I think was maybe the best example of their understanding away from home, the Ipswich game, because they were all moving in and out of position, but they all seemed to know where one was going to be. They all seemed to know where the space was, and they all connected so wonderfully together. So Callum is a huge miss. I'm not a huge fan of his defensive work. I think sometimes it can lack that defensive drive to support. But going forward and being a threat and offering a balanced attack is something that is essential for him. I think for so long, Forest really, particularly in those first 2 years, had a one-sided attack. The first season we had just Brennan on one side and then three in midfield. It was quite weird how we did that. And in the Championship, to an extent, I suppose we did that as well. Second season, under Cooper especially, playing Morgan out wide, but sort of inverted with then one of Callum or Anthony on the other wing, I really don't think works. So I think one of the best things Nuno has done for us is get that formation, get that attacking lineup and that quartet really going. But without one of them, it seems they all don't really work that well together.
Yeah, you said, George, that Forest started the game strongly, and they did, particularly the opening 10 minutes. It looked like we could rack up quite a few goals the way the game was panning out early on. There was a cross which came in from the right-hand side, and it was Wood up at the back post. I would have expected him to get this on target, given his quality in the air and the form he's shown this season. But it went over the bar. And I think he had one just after it as well, where another header that came in and it dropped onto the roof of the net. So there were a few opportunities for Wood in that first half, and it looked like it was going to be one-way traffic for the afternoon, and Forest would be the team that would take the game to Leicester and hopefully rack up a few goals. But it was Leicester who opened the scoring on 16 minutes, and it all came from a long throw-in on the far side of the pitch as the camera looks. I sit in the Brian Clough upper, and it looks like Luke Thomas puts his foot over the line when he's taking the throw-in. It wasn't picked up by the referee or referee's assistant. I don't know if there's been a rule change or something, which means your foot can be on the line but over. but it looked like he'd overstepped the mark and it was a foul throw. It wasn't given, and as the ball comes in, it's headed out by the Forest defence. It drops to El Canouse on the edge of the area. He has a shot, which is parried by Sells, and Connor Cody is there following up, and he nods in from close range. Another disappointing goal for Forest to concede, because when you watch it back, George, you can see that Forest defending wasn't all that great, and Cody was given way too much space and way too much time.
Well, as they have been doing really for the past few games, Forest defending is just reactionary. I think they're just waiting for something to happen and, oh yeah, we'll go and react to that, whereas Cody was anticipating the save that Sales makes. In terms of the throwing, I sit in the cuff as well. I think you're further to the right as we look at the pitch, so closer to the action than me. I sit just to the left of the halfway line. But I think we could all see that certainly one of the main sort of his forward foot was over the line. I think the rule is that both of you have to be at least some of it behind the line. So I don't know whether that constitutes to it. But he kept doing it as the game came on as well. And Sean Massey-Ellis never put a flag up. Tony Harrington never flagged it up as well. So Leicester kept doing it, which I suppose you would. And yeah, in terms of the throw-in, I mean, Forest had got so good at defending set pieces and balls into the box, but it just filled you with a bit of misconfidence, really, that they missed the first header. Really good save from Sells, but then he's got to rely on his defenders to be backing him up, to be anticipating the danger and to be there. It's all good trying to play offside and stuff, but your main reaction has got to be to defend that goal. And Matt Sells can't do it if he's got three Leicester players rushing towards him and only one in red. You know, I think he did it in the second half. You think of the save he made right towards the end, and he's barking at his defence because he makes the save and he's the one that then has to go and push it further away from goal. And that shot should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. So I think that goes a testament to Forest's decline defensively recently in the air, particularly. And Milenkovic has been one of my favourite players all season. I think he's been the reason, really, along with Sells' increase in performance in our defensive solidity. But I think Brentford, it was a very poor showing from him, and he didn't really fill himself with glory there. And as you mentioned, it was a shame because Forest had started the game so well. They had dominance, they had space all over the pitch, and I honestly thought that once that goal came for us, it'd be the first of many, but obviously the Leicester goal disrupted it, and we never really got back into that flow, I'd say, throughout the whole game, really.
Yeah, it did seem to knock us off our stride, but we responded, and it wasn't too long before Forest were level, 25 minutes in fact, and it came from a free kick wide on the right-hand side, right near the corner of the pitch. Luke Thomas had committed the foul. Anthony Elanga stood over the ball, whipped in a really nice cross to the near post, and Morgan Gibbs-White comes in and has the space and time to guide a header into the far corner of the net to make it 1-1. And much like our goal was poor defending, I think Leicester will look at theirs and think it might have been poor defending. But credit to Morgan for coming in unmarked, seeing the space, meeting the ball and scoring the goal. We talk about Morgan, it's an area of his game that he needs to improve on, and there he was popping up in the box with a header.
Yeah, I think he does it very, very well, actually. You think to a couple of goals he scored, I think the Brighton and the Wolves goals that he scores at home, near post headers from, I think they were both corners, but that's sort of his role now. He's certainly better suited to that than swinging balls in, which was his role last season, because his set pieces were atrocious, if we're being completely honest. But we've got somebody like Elanga, supported by Elliot Anderson, with phenomenal set-piece delivery. And then you've got somebody like Morgan, who maybe not be picked up because of his height. He's not, the tallest. You think of Milenkovic, Morato, Wood in there, Yatesy if he's on the pitch as well. Gibbs-White isn't going to be the first person to be man-marked. So, he does well to evade his marker, slip between the two Leicester players and nod it in. It's a really good header. You're always told to head it down into the ground, and he did that so well because Stalajic is a very good goalkeeper. And I'm sure if he just had it sort of flatly at him, he might have got a touch on it. So, yeah, I think it was vital as well, as you mentioned, that Forest did get that goal quickly. If they'd have gone 1-0 behind at half-time and that had seeped into the second half, then the stadium would have got nervous, because the stadium reacted well to Forest going behind. I think everybody was aware that we've got to stick behind the lads, we've got to try and cheer them over the line. But if that had carried on into the second half, maybe those nerves would have crept in. So, yeah, it was essential Forest scored that easily, and then we were all expecting maybe Forest to kick on to go get that second goal inside 5 or 10 minutes, but it never really came, Stephen.
No, it didn't. I mean, despite that, you still felt that Forest were the better side, and that over the course of the game, their quality would show out. I remember thinking as we were going in for half time, sure Forest will come out in the second half, attacking the Trent end, and they can get a good 2 or 3 here in the second half and make things comfortable. Forest did have an opportunity though, and it came after some good work down the left-hand side between Gibbs-White and Nico Williams, who right from the byline got the ball into the box, and Nicolas Dominguez had a shot which was parried away by Stolarczyk in the Leicester goal, and then Chris Wood was there. It was a very difficult chance, though, in all honesty. He tried to flick his head at it and get it on target. In the end, it went well wide and the chance was gone. And that meant at half-time, it was Forest 1, Leicester 1.
The 1865 Match Report.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want is a great feeling. Talk to a State Farm agent today to learn how you can choose to bundle and save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to this 1865 match report. So at half-time, it was Forest 1, Leicester 1. Neither side made changes at the interval. And in the second half, George, I mentioned a few minutes ago that I thought Forest would come out and make their superiority show. I wasn't wholly impressed with what Leicester had done in the first half, and I think their goal was more the product of poor play from Forest as opposed to something really good from them. And I just thought Forest, with everything to play for and everything at stake, and it being a local derby and knowing how good we've been at home this season, that we would come out, get a couple of goals and make it a pleasant afternoon for everybody. But it didn't turn out to be the case. But we did have some chances, didn't we? I think one of the big chances actually fell again to Nico Dominguez. This time it was a ball threaded through by Sangare down the right. Anthony Elanga puts the ball in, and Dominguez is in the middle of the penalty area, and he goes for a diving header when really a volley with either foot would have been the better route to goal. Whether he'd have scored, you don't know, but I think he would have had a greater chance of doing that had he gone for a volley.
Yeah, it was Sangare with the ball in as well, wasn't it? Which was superb. And I think he had one of his best afternoons in a Forest shirt. Again, he continued to... I mean, obviously the game was suited to him because he had a lot of space in midfield. And I think there was still a few defensive lapses. But in terms of Sangare on the ball, I think he offered control. I think he... was always trying to be forward thinking. Maybe 80-90% of his balls were forward. And he only passed... Well, there was once in the first half where he had space to drive over the halfway line and turn back, which was quite odd. But apart from that, his play on the whole was positive, and I think he really complemented someone like Anderson very well. And in a game where you maybe don't need a Dominguez or Yates in front of the back four, winning the ball back consistently, Sangare can work in there. I think he's got to obviously work on his defensive side, because for me, he's never going to be able to start a game against Liverpool, against City, or in the Europe next season against a tough opposition, because he doesn't offer you that defensive foothold. And Anderson is a more of a number 8, so you need a 6 that you're comfortable with. But yeah, it's a great ball in, and Dominguez, he has a chance in the first half as well that he spurned, as you mentioned. But if he scores, it's Forest's lucky day, as we know, because in front of goal, he really does struggle to have that sort of killer instinct. He reminds me a bit of Jack Cole back in the box, getting a nosebleed when he's up in there. And obviously, as a winger that he's now playing, he does get in those positions a lot more. And then I think Morgan had a chance, didn't he, with a header a few minutes later that he also had it straight at the goalkeeper as well. So Forest did start the second half reasonably well, but obviously we got the goal, as we mentioned. And I was disappointed when, after the goal, it sort of killed our momentum. But yeah, Dominguez scoring, it would be a lucky day, because I don't think he's scored all season so far, has he?
No, I think his last goal might have been, if it wasn't the header against Brentford last season, it would have been his goal against Man United. Yeah, which was a few weeks later. So he had a good opportunity there. The ball did take a big nick off a Leicester defender on the way through, and it sort of sat up and bounced in front of him. But still, I think going with a volley would have been the better option. And then a few minutes later, another great ball came in from the right. This time, Dominguez was round the back post. And this one, he actually does go in with a volley when a diving header would have been better. The ball went right through the penalty area. Dominguez was the last man at that back post. If he throws his head at it, he's got a chance, but he goes for the leg and he's nowhere near it. Again, is that just a player?
Yeah, I think he had that other one in his mind, didn't he?
Yeah, is that just a player who isn't used to being in those goal-scoring positions?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's exactly what it is, because he's not a clinical player. He's not somebody used to being in them positions, and he's thinking, oh, before I went for this, I'll go for this, and both of them didn't really work for us. So, if we're relying on somebody like Nico Dominguez to score us goals in games, then we're doing something wrong. Obviously, Chris Wood has a few chances, and I think they're quite tough, particularly his first half ones, as you mentioned. But, if all you're creating is chances for Nico Dominguez, then something is going wrong.
Forest did find another goal soon after, and yeah, we've got to talk about this one, George, because it was so well worked. It started with Ola Aina. He fed the ball inside into the right channel for Gibbs White. Hits a swerving cross from deep, and there he is at the back post. Chris Wood coming in, diving header, and he buries it beyond Stolarczyk. The ground erupts. It's a brilliant goal. Chris Wood's 20th of the season, which is great for him. Good to see a Forest player hitting 20 goals in one Premier League season. And at that point, Forest are 2-1 up, and it's all going to plan.
Yeah, what a brilliant, fantastic goal that actually summed up both players' strengths so well. Morgan having the awareness to see what's around him, to know he's got space, and then the vision to see Chris Wood making that run, peeling off the last defender, as he always does. He's always making runs like that. And if you just spend sort of 5 or 10 minutes watching him, he'll make 3 or 4 runs like that in that period of time. Morgan sees it. Obviously, that, like I mentioned, he's got so much space because Leicester midfield was absolutely a car crash, to be honest. But yeah, perfection, that ball from Morgan. It reminds you of that one he made out to Hudson-Odoi at Manchester City, not quite to that extent, but, perfectly timed, perfectly weighted into the excellent area, between the goalkeeper, because it's curling away from him at that point. So the goalie can't really come and get to it. And there's only one man that's going to win that, isn't there? Chris Wood in the middle against one of his former teams, of course. He always likes to score against them. Getting a City ground goal, which he was due. I don't think he scored at home since Brighton, if I'm correct. I might be wrong. He might have scored since then, but I'm pretty sure at home he hasn't scored since then. So it was a really brilliantly taken header, diving in there, knocking it into the corner where it was coming from, because heading it across goal, I think there was more of a scope to get it wrong, whereas he just sort of helped the ball in. And yeah, excellent header from Wood, brilliant positioning. And at that point, you're thinking, Forest 2-1 ahead, they're going to kick on, they're going to get a third and a fourth, and, really get the dominant win that I think they needed, because I think even if they had win a scrappy 2-1 game, it doesn't give you that much confidence. I think, Maradona and I mentioned it, and we mentioned it in the match report last week, that we needed a rampaging, positive, dominant display to really reignite the fight for Champions League football. And obviously, by the time Forest didn't score sort of 10 minutes after, I'm thinking, yeah, it's going to go the distance in at 2-1 and we're going to be tantalisingly sat here. And obviously in the end, we don't even come away with the 3 points. So, in true Forest style, we didn't make it easy. And this time we were made to pay for it.
Yeah, and this seems to be a common theme, particularly in recent games, where we get ourselves back on top, we score a goal, and then we seem to retreat and we don't look like we want to build on what we've got. And this against Leicester would have been the perfect opportunity to make it 3-1 and not even have to worry for the last 25, 30 minutes. But yeah, after the goal, Forest just seemed to lose a bit of something. And again, and we've spoken about this in recent match reports, there seems to be a bit of a sloppiness in our play. Whether it's down to tiredness, whether it's down to mental fatigue, I don't know, or whether it's down to players feeling the pressure, but just passes not coming off, little flicks not coming off, and players picking the wrong choices. All too often, and this was happening today as well, we had players stood on the wings. Nico Williams, Anthony Elanga would be well out in space on the left and right, and players would be turning back in and playing short passes instead of trying to get the ball out wide quick, which earlier in the season they would have done instinctively, and it was one of our great strengths. It does feel like we've lost a bit of confidence in our play.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because, the Forest of old wouldn't have stopped at 2-1. They'd have kept going. They'd have seen Leicester as, a team to be at the taking and really impose their threat on them. But as it was, they sat back, they invited pressure, and they didn't really have that dominance or confidence or belief that a third goal was sort of necessary. And it wasn't a surprise, like I mentioned, and I said to you off air, everything that happened today or yesterday as you listen to this wasn't a surprise. The fact that Forest went behind early to a goal of poor defending was not a surprise. I mean, the fact they fought back wasn't either because of their mental strength this season, but then the fact that they didn't have that fight, that belief to go on and get the third goal. Then the fact that Leicester scored and Forest didn't come back after that wasn't a surprise. It all morphed into what we've been seeing over the last few weeks. Even the Spurs game, it was a brilliant positive moment and it was vital we got that win. But you look at the performance and Forest, did they really merit to take anything from that game? And I think that had the potential to kickstart the fight, the Spurs game. But in the end, the things we saw in that performance have carried on without the goal scoring ability. And it's cost us in the end. So, yeah, I think mentally has been our biggest strength this season, because you look at the amount of successful players in there, you can't pick one out. The one thing you can pick out is the united collective strength that we've formed this season. And I think that over the last few weeks has slowly fallen away. We've not really reacted to the sort of defeats very well, or the dropping points in this instance. And we've collectively got a sort of negative mindset about us, and that's what ultimately I think has cost us in the end, more than anything on the pitch in terms of tactics or quality.
As the game went on, Leicester made a couple of changes. They brought on Boubakary Samari for Oliver Skipp and Facundo Buonanotte for Jordan Ayew. Ryan Yates came on for Nicolas Dominguez with about 15-16 minutes of normal time remaining, and that was Forest's first change of the afternoon. And I could understand where Nuno was coming from there. Dominguez had put in a real shift, and Ryan Yates, you would hope, would help Forest close out the game. But for the last 25-30 minutes or so, and this is before Yates came on, it did feel like Forest were losing control on the match, and particularly in the midfield as well. It seemed like Leicester were getting more joy in picking the ball up and being able to come forward through the Forest midfield and create a few opportunities. And it felt like they were getting a bit of momentum.
Yeah, in terms of control, I don't think Forest ever had control of the game apart from those first 10 minutes, as I mentioned, because, after then they had control of the ball and they maybe had the better chances and looked like the team that was more threatening. But I don't think there was ever an easy moment that we felt relaxed and felt like Forest were definitely going to coast home to victory. I was always wary of Leicester's threat, and I don't think we painted ourselves in glory defensively. I think Yates and Sangare in midfield is a very weird one, because they both do very different things, and I think they're almost too opposite to work. You think of their stature, that think they might be quite similar, but they're very, very different players. And I've never been a fan of Yates and Sangare in there. I'm Yates' biggest advocate. I really think he's a phenomenal player, and I'd have him start in most games. But I just think next to Sangare it doesn't work. And I thought maybe it was too early for Yates. That I maybe took Anderson off and put Dominguez in midfield next to Sangare, if that's what he wanted to do, or take Sangare off, as much as he played very well. I don't think Yates and Sangare works, and that's not singling any of them out for their flaws. I just think that their attributes don't complement each other that well. And as you mentioned, that meant we sort of got overrun in midfield, particularly down the left-hand side as well. I thought Nico struggled, didn't really have much support. And, it culminated in Leicester finding their way back into the game from a position that Forest never should have lost and lost the lead from.
Yeah, let's talk about that goal then. And it's one which, from Forest's perspective, one we want to forget, because it comes from a ball from the left-hand side. I think it's Luke Thomas tries to fire the ball in low towards Jamie Vardy. Ola Aina comes across to intercept, and Nikola Milenkovic is following Vardy. Aina and Milenkovic collide, and the ball spins out towards Buonanotte, and at this point he's one-on-one with Morato. And I think you see here, George, where we miss Murillo, because I actually would have fancied Murillo in a one-on-one against Buonanotte. I fancy him in a one-on-one against anybody. He's that good. And Morato just doesn't have that in his game, and you could see with the way that he kind of flat-footed, turned his body, but was never really near Buonanotte and never really made a challenge on him. And Buonanotte goes through, slots the ball past Sells, and it's 2-2. And again, it felt like a goal where Forest had just shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, exactly. There was an incident a few minutes later, wasn't there, where Vardy got in a similar position, and it was Yates who was in there covering for Milenkovic once again, being out of position, and Yates managed to sort of block him, shepherd the ball away, and clear it out of play. But Morata just didn't have that in his locker. I think Iron maybe is a bit of a culprit as well. I think before that he was involved in a bit of a brawl with Buonanotte that he didn't need to get involved in at all. It was stupid that he went to the referee because Buonanotte got booked, but Iron decided to go in there, say things, rile himself up, and then he's so riled up, he forgets Buonanotte's there. He chases the ball when I know Ryan is coming onto it maybe favourably, but Milenkovic going from behind it to sweep it away out of play. It's always his ball. But obviously, it's comical the way they fall over each other. And then Buonanotte strides through. I think he scored his first Premier League goal for Brighton against us. I remember in the 3-2 defeat. I'm pretty sure he scored there on his debut. And he came back to haunt us in a blue shirt again. Yeah, it was comical defending, to be honest. Leicester had a chance before that with Vardy, didn't they? They had chances after that. And, a couple of times when they had the ball, they had like an overload and they didn't have the quality to make it. I said, it's reminded me of Everton at home, the way that we're attacking, but leaving space and allowing Leicester to have a few bodies forward that look like if they get one pass, they're one pass away from sticking it in the back of the net. It was a very disappointing way to end the game, to be honest, because after the goal, there was no real fight, no real drive forward. And I don't think the substitutes help. And we'll come on to the ridiculous Tyro situation that really hindered us. But I think there was just a real lack of forward drive, energy and commitment from everybody on show to get Forest back into the lead once they conceded that goal.
Nuno's response to that goal was to bring on Taiwo Awoniyi for Ibrahim Sangare. And I must be honest, I don't understand what the thinking is behind this, because we've seen now on a few occasions this season
it's never worked.
Taiwo and Wood cannot play together. I don't know why Nuno persists with it. And all it did was put two players up front together who don't work well together at the cost of a body in midfield. So Forest, having already lost control of the midfield, stood no chance of trying to get back into the game and trying to get control of the midfield again because they were outnumbered in there.
And what it also does is it takes your best finisher and Chris Wood out the box, because we know Taiwo and Wood both aren't naturally brilliant on the ball. I think Wood is slightly better, so he then drops a bit deeper, maybe into the sort of 10, because Morgan's then playing in the 8. So it means that if a ball goes into the box, we've got Taiwo in the middle trying to finish it, which nobody really, I don't think, is confident of that. It takes our best striker out of the game. So I really struggle to think what on earth it brings, apart from if we play a goal kick forward and Taiwo can maybe win it and flick it onto Wood. That's the only possible way that it works together. But we don't do that enough. It just baffled me. Why, especially if you're going to do that, get another winger on the other side. Push Morgan out wide like we has been doing. And I was surprised he didn't, because Morgan has ended up out wide quite a lot recently, but he's still staying in the middle. We still had Elanga doing really nothing on the other side. When we've got Sousa and Jota, I thought this was the perfect chance for Jota, because Forest were lacking energy, lacking belief. Jota comes on, he'll disrupt, he'll get involved, he'll win headers, as he did for the short cameo that he had. He should have been on, I think, as soon as Leicester scored that equaliser, to really take the fight to them for the last 20 minutes. In the end, it turned out to be, because we just had nothing down that side. Nico can't attack on his own. Elanga and Aina, obviously Aina's still coming back from fitness, and even when he is fit, he doesn't have the stamina to be up and down for 90 minutes. I just thought, as much as I'm not a huge Jota fan, and I think at times his end product isn't great, in the box, you back him to score, really. He always gets in them positions. And he just would have brought exactly what Forest were missing, which was that positivity and that energy that, as you say, we were also lacking with Murillo, because you saw against Everton, Murillo's constant positivity, hindered us because he's trying to control and play forward and he slips over. But that positivity is exactly what we needed right until the very end, because everybody didn't have that on the pitch for me.
I said it in our WhatsApp group after the game that I thought Nuno got it wrong today. And I still stand by that, because I look at the way that not only he reacted during the game, I think some of his substitutions were too late in coming. And when they did come, they weren't the right players to come on at that time. But also the way that he's managed the squad. I know we haven't got brilliant options off the bench, but going back to the point I was making at the start of this report, if you play Jota or Ramon Sosa and you go with the two wingers, you've always then got Dominguez on the bench to come on. And when the game perhaps is slipping away from you, like this game was from Forest's point of view, when it was 2-1 and we were struggling to get a foothold on things. To have Dominguez coming on with fresh legs would have made such a difference, because the only alternative was to move him in from the right wing where he was playing on, I don't know, 75 minutes or something, when he's already knackered because he's played the whole game up to that point. And I think that's where Nuno could have managed players better, could have managed the game better, and certainly his substitutions, I think, could have been better thought out as well. I say that as somebody who thinks he's barely put a foot wrong all season, Nuno. He's been so good tactically and everything else, but I think today he got it wrong. And last couple of games, actually, there's been a few decisions he's made where I'm not so sure if they've been the right ones.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of that from everybody at Forest, hasn't there? It's not just Nuno, it's the decision making in the box, in midfield, and now off the pitch in terms of the ownership. So there's a lot that's, not really going in the right direction that has been this season. I think apart from Fulham at home, which again, he played Tyro and Wood up front and then didn't play any wingers, which was completely baffling. And I really don't know what the thought process was there. But apart from that's the one that sticks out from Nuno's sort of faltering for me. But yeah, he's been faultless this season. And I think maybe the season's catching up with him as well. I just find it baffling how he's not got confidence in Ramon Sousa, because, he scored a couple of goals in the cup games we've played. I think coming off the bench, he struggles because Forest, when he comes on, are often quite desperate. He's not a Lemorata. He's not going to come on when we're seeing out a game. He's coming on if Forest are determined to take a game somebody and to try and score a goal. And I don't think he has that positivity or that willingness to get involved straight away to have the impact that someone like Jota does, who comes on, impact, and he's there. But from the start, Sousa for me had to play. And, I think Dominguez maybe coming on, as you mentioned, to provide that energy, to provide that threat. And, he's been playing well. Anderson's played well and Sangare's played well. And maybe Nuno thinks, they're all in good form. But you've got to pick your best player for each position, not who's in form. That's what England have found out recently and over the years as well. You have to pick your best players for the best position. And for me, Sousa would have been the best from the off. And while we're talking about Nuno, we might as well move on to the ridiculousness that happened at the end, Stephen. Shall we? I'll let you explain and then I'll give my angered thoughts about it, because it was frankly an absolute car crash.
Yeah, well, I say before we get to that, I think we should mention as well the incident involving Taiwo with the offside that wasn't given, and then play goes on. It's Alanga who's got the ball down the right-hand side, puts it across, and Taiwo goes sliding in at the back post with, I think it's Buonanotte, and looks like he collides with the post, Taiwo, and he's on the deck. He's not moving, and this.
At least he scored, which is a rarity for him.
Yeah, well, you say I think he hit the post, didn't he? Yeah, or
did it?
The net rippled, but I think it was the wrong side of the net.
Of course.
But this is an example of the offside rule where the referee's assistant, they can't just lift the flag up straight away and say it's offside and players stop. This is where he was offside. Play should have just stopped. It doesn't, and then you end up with this ridiculous situation where a player ends up injured, and then we have a massive delay as we're coming up to the 90th minute. And then this just turns into a bit of a farce, doesn't it, George, all of this, involving Taiwo and the physios?
It's frankly ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, on the lino thing, I think the linesman doesn't do anything wrong, does she? She does exactly what they're meant to do. It's the rule that's ridiculous. I think, yes, I get the rule and I get the, if it's tight, and or you're in a little bit of doubt, then yeah, let it play out, particularly if it's close to goal. But when it was about 4, I mean, I've not seen it back, I don't know. But to me, it looked about 4 yards offside. I don't know why. I think, was it Domingo? I don't know. It wasn't Domingo because off the pitch, but whoever passed to him, it was silly to pass to him because he was clearly offside. And, I sometimes even players stop. And I know Elanga's not that type of player, but anyway. And then the whole stadium could see that Taiwo was going to struggle. From the moment Stojacic goes over to the bench and, is clamouring the Forest bench to come on because he's injured, and the way he's sort of remonstrating with the lineswoman as well, that there's an issue, and that Taiwo, particularly with the type of player that he is, he's made of glass anyway, is probably going to not be able to carry on. Forest are obviously making the sub with Jota Silva coming on. Why they allowed Taiwo to stay sort of inverted commas, stay on the pitch is frankly ridiculous. I get it from Taiwo because players always want to give what they've got. He's came off the bench. He's not going to want to go off. And Forest are chasing the game and they've got a striker on the pitch they don't want to take off. So I get it from him. But I'm not a medical expert. I could see from 200 yards away that the bloke was nearly half dead. So how the medical staff who are with him, who are potentially supposedly experts, have said he's okay to carry on with the game is ridiculous. And then surely if you're a bench, because I'm sure the medical staff haven't given him 100% yes, he's definitely going on. Surely you would just wait 30 seconds, allow Forest to play with 10 men for a brief period of time and see if Taiwo can walk around to come back on, then make the sub, then play. You've only played 1 minute with 10 men and you play the rest of it with 11 fit players. Then why they've allowed Taiwo to walk back on, clearly unfit. Honestly, it is an absolute disgrace. I think back to when Henderson played for us, Dean Henderson, with a broken leg for 10 minutes. It's nearly as bad as that. Obviously, Henderson's a keeper, so it's a bit different. And Forrest also had subs in hand. So even if he wanted to make the Jota for Anderson sub, he could have also brought Sousa on for Taiwo and solved that issue as well. I really don't understand what the thinking was. And obviously it sparks the anger from Marinakis. But it was just everybody surely not thinking. And maybe us as fans, we're not as involved. We're not in the moment as much as they are. We've not got to make that snap decision. But everybody, I thought, in the stadium just thought the logical thing to do was either take Taiwo off or just wait. Why they proceeded with a risk is frankly ridiculous. And then Marinakis, obviously, that's a huge talking point at the end. I didn't see him at the end because I was sort of slumped in my seat, disappointed at the fact that Forest have seemingly thrown it away. And I know you said, Stephen, that you in rage walked off. So we both didn't see it. And we'll come on to what he thinks about it. But his anger comes, I think, from that moment. But it really stems from the fact that Forest have thrown this position away. And obviously it gave him a moment to be angry about, and that's what he's blamed it on. But his anger comes far deeper than just that moment.
The 1865 Match Report.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority is using Google AI to create smarter tolling systems and improve traffic flow for Texans. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
It was a bit of a strange atmosphere, actually, at full time because Forest had just qualified for Europe, yet there were boos around the ground. Such was the disappointment of the result against Leicester and the manner of it, and also events of the last couple of weeks and Forest's drop off in form. But then, Evangelos Marinakis comes onto the pitch and looks like he remonstrates with Nuno. They have a bit of a heated conversation and then they both stride off. Now, yes, I can understand from Marinakis' point of view his disappointment with what happened. 95% of the stadium were disappointed with what happened today. But there's a right way of doing things, and coming out onto the pitch and talking to your manager like that in front of live TV cameras and millions of people watching around the world, not to mention everybody in the stadium, 30,000 people, it's not a good look. If you've got to have those conversations, they've got to be done in private. You can't air your dirty linen in public like that.
Yeah, and it's also giving the media more attention and more spotlight on him because, they don't like the fact that he's a character, the fact that he's present, the fact that he's a good owner, really, because the media don't like Nottingham Forest success and they continue to write us off. So, it's given them another headline and another field day. But I think the main winner from this, and I was worried that, it might force Nuno to resign or something like that. That was my rash sort of feeling about it. And I don't know what to think about it because I think everybody had anger and Marinakis has obviously got a platform to display it more than we have, but doing so on the pitch was probably a step too far. But Nuno is certainly the winner from the situation because the way that he handled I've only heard the Radio Nottingham question and the Sky Sports News question, but I can imagine exactly how he's handled every single question about it because the media want to build it as Nuno's under pressure despite Champions League football, Marinakis is da-da-da-da-da-da. But the fact that Nuno has just battered it away with such confidence, such coolness, as I expected him to do, because he handles the media so well. I was really proud of him for coming out and not, owning the fact that football's an emotional game and everybody has these emotions. Nuno himself would have been distraught by the performance. I think if you look at the pitch, he's quite sort of shocked to see Marinakis. But we all saw it and weren't overly shocked by it. I don't think. I obviously saw it on social media afterwards and thought, oh yeah, Marinakis has done that. It wasn't sort of a huge shock. So I think we've got to be careful, and we can't turn into a circus or anything like that, because if that continues to happen, particularly on the day, as you mentioned, that we secure European football, our owner is on the pitch remonstrating and complaining. It isn't the best look, and Forest maybe have got to look at that. But I think Nuno really handled that so well, and I'm confident now that he isn't going to walk away, because that was my initial sort of fear, if you like.
I think Gary Neville on the Sky Sports coverage said words to the effect of Nuno should resign because of that.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
But just before we started recording, Evangelos Marinakis released a statement. Now, something's gone off when Marinakis releases a statement. Here it is. So today is a day for celebration, because after 30 years, Nottingham Forest is now guaranteed to be competing on the European stage once again. A promise I made to our supporters when we achieved promotion. With 2 more games to go in the Premier League, we must keep believing and keep dreaming right to the final kick in the final game. We are extremely proud and close to Nuno and the team, and we must all celebrate the historic achievements of this season. Everybody, coaching staff, players, supporters, and including myself, we were frustrated around the injury of Taiwo and the medical staff's misjudgment on Taiwo's ability to continue the game. This is natural. This is a demonstration of the passion we feel for our club. Let's all be grateful, passionate, and keep on dreaming. So that's the words of Evangelos Marinakis a couple of hours after the final whistle. What's your reaction to those words, George?
I think his words are very similar to the mood of the fan base, because, as you mentioned, everybody was angry at full time, or seemingly angry, disappointed, at whatever you like. But, the more that hours tick by, the more you realise, actually, you think of the context. Obviously, I'm still disappointed. I'm still gutted that it seems like Champions League football that was in the palm of our hand has been snatched away purely down to our own ability not to do the job. And that sickens me that Forest have done that to themselves. But, once you look at it, you think, actually, we've had injuries. We've had so much good fortune over the course of the season. It's going to come, and it's just sort of everything bad has came at the wrong time. And I think that's sort of the vibe Marinakis is giving off. And, it's, as you mentioned, he's not very, particularly on Forest, he isn't a very sort of active person on social media. Obviously, he's always an active presence at the ground and at the games, but he doesn't really sort of speak on social media. So you knew it was something big then, and I think it was right that he addressed it as well, because everybody knows it's possibly not the right thing to do. And I think by doing that, he's acknowledged that and hasn't sort of stood by what he's done, because in the moment, he's possibly one of the most emotional managers that English football's ever seen. So in the moment, it wasn't a huge surprise, but I think I like the fact that he's owned his mistake and spoken about it, and then back to Nuno at the same time, because that silenced every media headline you could possibly want to do. That silenced the noise. That's given faith to Nuno, faith to the squad that, have faith in this manager, and I will keep supporting you nevertheless, because the biggest thing about Nottingham Forest and our success over the past 4 years has been how united we've been. So we can't afford for the man at the top to be cut away from the coaching staff and the manager. So him to reunite that has really given me confidence. And going into the last 2 games, maybe not so much, but going forward, knowing that Marinakis is on side with Nuno, on side with the players, going into a European venture fills everybody with confidence, I think.
So the point leaves Forest 7th in the Premier League. They are a point behind Aston Villa, who are 6th, and also a point behind Chelsea, who are 5th on goal difference. Significantly, the result means that Forest's Champions League hopes are no longer in their hands. They need to win their last 2 games and hope that Villa can drop points in the meantime. But yeah, just looking ahead now to West Ham and Forest's next fixture. West Ham haven't been particularly great all season. They've pulled off a good win at Old Trafford today against Man United, but you just don't know what West Ham you're going to face. And Forest, certainly away from home against the Hammers in the Premier League, we haven't tended to do well. But do you think that Forest can bounce back and get something at the London Stadium?
Probably not, to be honest, because I'm a naturally negative Forest fan anyway, and given the fact of how the last months go, I'm not hugely confident going into it. I think Forest have to try and find a way to just forget the last month and try and find that, momentum and positivity that has served them so well for this season, because it'll be a shame this season if it peters out and if we end up finishing, 7th and, after losing, or not without a win since Tottenham. It'll be a shame because of how much positive memories we've had, and it will almost be sort of a lasting, looming, lingering negativity. But Forest have got Europe, so I think it'll be a good day out. I'm hoping for a similar atmosphere. I was at Burnley and I was at Crystal Palace, and I think it's relegation is what they said. It's Europe for the Reds. I'm sure that'll be out in true Shakira style. I'm hoping so anyway, and I think it has the potential to be a really good day out because West Ham are, as we mentioned, they're pretty poor this season, to be honest. They're beating Man United, who are also probably as bad as them, to be fair. So it's not a huge surprise to see that result. Forest away from home recently, you might suggest, have been better than their home form. Think of Palace and Spurs. They performed better, certainly, against Palace than they did today or any of the recent home games. And they've got the job done away from home against poor sides. So you would hope it's a reasonably decent tie because West Ham haven't been relegated, so it's not like they've got the freedom, but they're going nowhere. They're stagnant. They've got nothing to play for at all. The game doesn't really mean anything to them apart from the fact it's the last home game of the season, I'm assuming. So Forest couldn't have asked for probably a better game, but we've been saying that for the past month and Forest haven't got the job done. So, who knows what to expect at the minute, Stephen. But I'll be there. I'll be cheering the lads on and fingers crossed we can round off what's been quite a brilliant away season with a brilliant away result.
And despite the disappointing result today, we have to remember Forest are going to be in Europe next season. European nights will be returning to the City Ground, and that is something to celebrate and a positive note to end this match report on. Thanks to George for joining me, and thank you for joining us. We will have our Friday 5 for you later in the week, and then after that, we will of course have our match report after the West Ham game. Until then, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry, with more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal? The air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.